My reflection in the antique mirror was that of a stranger, or, perhaps, the woman I had been all along, hidden in plain sight. At 68, I had spent the last decade cultivating an existence of quiet simplicity, a deliberate retreat from a world that had once known my name on book spines and academic journals. My uniform had become soft cardigans and practical shoes, the comfortable camouflage of a woman content with her garden and her memories. But today, draped in a gown of deep sapphire silk, a piece I hadn't worn since accepting an award in Berlin years ago, I saw the flicker of that other life. The fabric whispered of lecture halls and standing ovations, a stark contrast to the silent judgment I'd grown accustomed to from my own family. It was the day of my grandson's graduation, a milestone for which I was, apparently, not welcome. My daughter-in-law, Charlotte, had forgotten to invite me. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that while she and my grandson were scanning the crowd for their seats, I would be waiting in the wings, preparing to step onto the stage as the university's keynote speaker. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air in my small, sun-drenched cottage was filled with the scent of lavender and old books, a fragrance of peace I had meticulously curated. For years, this was my sanctuary, the place I had retreated to after a lifetime in the demanding spotlight of academia. Here, I was not Dr. Genevieve Ainsworth, the sociologist whose work on class mobility had become required reading in universities across the globe. I was simply Jen, a grandmother who made excellent strawberry jam and tended to a rowdy garden of heirloom roses. It was a role I cherished, but it was a role nonetheless, a costume I wore for a very specific audience, my son, Robert, and his wife, Charlotte. Robert, bless his heart, had always been a gentle soul, easily swayed by the stronger personalities around him, and no personality was stronger than Charlotte's. She was a woman who measured worth in brand names and country club memberships, a gatekeeper of a world she had meticulously built for her family, a world in which, she had made it clear, I did not quite belong. To her, my quiet life was not a choice, but a limitation. She saw my small cottage not as a peaceful haven, but as evidence of a life that had failed to accumulate the proper trophies. She interpreted my preference for a well-worn novel over a glossy magazine as a sign of my disconnect from the modern world. She had crafted a narrative for me, the dowdy, slightly eccentric old mother-in-law, and she played her part as the long-suffering, dutiful daughter-in-law to perfection, her sighs and veiled comments painting a masterpiece of martyrdom. I never corrected her. In the beginning it was almost a game, a social experiment I observed with detached curiosity. I wanted to see if my own grandson, Leo, the boy I had bounced on my knee, while proofreading my doctoral thesis, would see past the facade. For a while he did. As a child, he'd loved the stories I'd tell, not of fairy tales, but of the bustling streets of London, the vibrant markets of Marrakesh, the hushed libraries of the Vatican, places my work had taken me. He'd look at me with wide, curious eyes, seeing not a simple old woman but a world of adventure. But as he grew, molded by his mother's ambitions, a distance began to form. My stories were replaced by the allure of designer clothes and expensive gadgets, my cottage a place he visited out of obligation, his discomfort palpable in the sterile silence that fell between us. Charlotte's narrative had won. He had started to see me through her eyes. Today was his graduation from Northwood University, the culmination of 4 years of hard work. I was immensely proud, a deep, resonant pride that ached in my chest. But this pride was tangled with a profound sadness. I had received no formal invitation, no excited phone call, no mention of the ceremony at all. The silence from their sprawling suburban home was a statement in itself, louder than any explicit rejection. I knew Charlotte's hand was in this. A university graduation was a prime opportunity for her to perform, to showcase her perfect family, her successful son. An old woman in a faded cardigan, smelling of soil and mothballs, did not fit the aesthetic. I was a loose thread on her perfectly woven tapestry, and she was determined to snip me off. I walked over to my bookshelf, my fingers tracing the spines of my own published works. The Social Ladder, Myth and Mobility, Invisible Walls, Class in the Modern Age. It was ironic. I had spent my life writing about the very invisible walls Charlotte had so diligently erected around her family. She owned my books, of course. They were displayed on a high shelf in their formal living room, collecting dust, treated as artifacts of a past that had little to do with the woman who came over for Christmas dinner. She'd once introduced me to a friend of hers as Robert's mother. She used to be a professor, you know. Used to be. As if my mind, my history, my entire identity had expired the moment I retired. My gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of me and a man with a kind, intelligent face. Drive Alistair Finch, the president of Northwood University. We were standing on a stage, shaking hands, a younger version of me with dark, upswept hair, accepting an honorary doctorate a decade ago. Alistair had been a dear friend and colleague for over 30 years. We had debated in faculty lounges, collaborated on research papers, and shared countless bottles of wine while lamenting the state of modern education. It was Alistair who had called me 2 months ago, his voice filled with a familiar, persuasive energy. The university was planning to finally, publicly, honor the anonymous benefactor of its most prestigious scholarship program, the Phoenix Endowment, and they wanted me to be the keynote speaker at the graduation ceremony. The Phoenix Endowment. My secret. My quiet act of rebellion against the very elitism Charlotte so eagerly embraced. It was a scholarship I had established years ago, with the royalties from my books, designed specifically to help brilliant students from low-income backgrounds. Students who, like me, had to fight twice as hard for a seat at the table. It was my way of sending the elevator back down. And now, the time had come for the benefactor to be revealed. My grandson Leo was graduating. And I, his forgotten grandmother, was the guest of honor. The decision to establish the Phoenix Endowment had been one of the most personal of my life. I had grown up in a family where every penny was counted, where the dream of a university education seemed as distant as the moon. It was only through a patchwork of scholarships and a fierce, unyielding determination that I had managed to carve out a place for myself in the hallowed halls of academia. I never forgot the feeling of being an outsider, the subtle sting of condescension from those who were born into the world I was fighting to enter. My entire career was a testament to that struggle, an academic exploration of the very forces that tried to keep people like me out. When my books became successful, generating a stream of income I had never anticipated, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wouldn't buy a bigger house or a fancier car. I would build a door for others. I named it the Phoenix Endowment because it was meant for students who had risen from the ashes of circumstance, who had the fire of ambition, but lacked the fuel of opportunity. I worked directly with Alistair Finch to set it up, with one strict condition: absolute anonymity. I didn't want the glory or the recognition. The success of the Phoenix Scholars was reward enough. Over the years, I had followed their careers with quiet pride. Doctors, engineers, artists, and entrepreneurs, each a testament to the power of a single chance. My own grandson, Leo, had even benefited from the program, though he didn't know it. The university-wide arts initiative that had funded his final-year thesis project was a direct offshoot of the endowment. The irony was a bitter pill. The very foundation of his academic success was built by the woman his mother deemed unworthy of witnessing it. When Alistair called with his proposal, I was hesitant. "It's time, Jen," he had urged, his voice warm but firm. "The endowment has grown beyond our wildest dreams. The board feels it's time to give it a face. Your face. Your story will inspire a new generation of philanthropists. And having you as the keynote speaker at this year's graduation, it would be legendary." He paused, then added, "I know Leo is in this graduating class. It seems like fate, doesn't it?" Fate. It felt more like a collision course. But the idea began to take root. For a decade, I had allowed Charlotte's narrative to shrink my world. I had played the part of the harmless, stodgy old woman, believing it was the price of peace, the only way to maintain a fragile connection with my son and grandson. But what had it cost me? My identity. My voice. Perhaps Alistair was right. Perhaps it was time to stop being a ghost in my own family's story. I agreed. The official, embossed invitation from the president's office arrived a week later. It was beautiful, a world away from the digital evites and casual text messages that Charlotte favored. I placed it on my desk, a secret promise of the day to come. I told no one, wanting to see how things would unfold naturally. I gave Charlotte every opportunity. I would call and ask about the graduation plans, my tone light and casual. "Oh, it's all so hectic, Jen," she would sigh, a master of the vague dismissal. "So many people to coordinate, you know how it is." I knew she was lying. I knew the tickets had been booked, the celebratory lunch reservations made, the outfits planned. I was not part of the equation. The final confirmation call came from Charlotte 3 days before the ceremony. It was the call I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I had just come in from the garden, my hands smelling of earth and roses. "Jen? It's Charlotte." Her voice was brisk, efficient. "Listen, about the graduation on Saturday." "I'm so sorry, it completely slipped my mind to call you sooner. It's been an absolute madhouse here." I waited, holding my breath. "That's quite all right, dear. I can only imagine how exciting it all is." "Well, that's the thing," she continued, and I could almost hear her wince with false sympathy. "It seems there's been a bit of a mix-up with the tickets. The university was only able to give us 4, and of course Robert and I need 2. And Leo's father wants to bring his new wife, you understand. It's just a numbers game. We're absolutely gutted. We were so hoping you could be there." The lie was so bald, so insulting in its lack of effort. Universities, especially for a graduation ceremony of thousands, did not limit tickets so severely for the families of graduates. And even if they did, the idea that I, the groom's paternal grandmother, would be the first one cut from the list was preposterous. It was a deliberate, calculated exclusion, delivered with the flimsy excuse of a bureaucratic error. "I see," I said, my voice betraying none of the cold fury that was washing over me. "What a shame. But I understand completely. Family logistics can be so tricky. You're an absolute saint for being so understanding," she chirped, relieved that I had not put up a fight. "We'll be sure to take lots of pictures for you. We'll probably just do a small family thing afterwards, maybe grab a bite somewhere casual. We'll have you over for a proper celebration dinner next week, I promise." Another lie. I knew their casual bite was a reservation at the Oak Room, the most exclusive restaurant in town, a place where my gardening clothes would have caused a scandal. The promise of a future dinner was a phantom, an illusion meant to placate me until the event was safely over. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, my voice as sweet as poison. "You all have a wonderful time. Please give Leo my love and tell him how incredibly proud I am." "Will do, General. You're the best. Talk soon." She hung up before I could say another word. Remaya. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the receiver still in my hand, the silence of the cottage pressing in on me. The casual cruelty of it all was breathtaking. She hadn't just forgotten me, she had erased me. She had deemed me unworthy of sharing in one of the most important days of her son's life. A hot, bitter tear slid down my cheek, followed by another. I had allowed this. For years I had absorbed the small slights, the backhanded compliments, the quiet dismissals, all in the name of family harmony. But this was not harmony. This was subjugation. This was a slow, methodical erasure of my worth. And I was done. I wiped my eyes, my resolve hardening like steel. She thought she was cutting me out. She had no idea she was setting me free. She wanted me to stay home, to look at photographs of a life I wasn't allowed to participate in. But I wouldn't be at home. I would be on the stage, looking out at her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning of the graduation dawned bright and clear. The sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was the kind of perfect day that Charlotte would no doubt claim credit for arranging. In her world, even the weather bent to her will. In my cottage, I moved with a calm, deliberate purpose. There were no frantic searches for a suitable outfit, no last-minute anxieties. My sapphire silk gown was already hanging, pressed and waiting. My speech, which I knew by heart, lay on the desk. It wasn't a speech about revenge or recrimination. It was a speech about the quiet power of education, about the unseen hands that lift us up, and about the responsibility to send the elevator back down. It was everything I believed in, and today, it would be my response to years of being underestimated. Instead of driving my modest sedan, a car Charlotte once referred to as aggressively sensible, a black town car, sent by the university, arrived at my door at precisely 10 o'clock. The driver, a polite young man in a crisp suit, held the door for me, addressing me as Dr. Ainsworth. The name felt both foreign and familiar, a cloak of my former life that I was now draping back over my shoulders. As we pulled away from my quiet street, I felt a pang of something akin to grief. I was leaving behind the persona of Jen, the harmless grandmother. When my family saw me next, that version of me would be gone forever. The journey to the university was a journey back in time. We drove past the old neighborhoods where I had first lived as a junior professor, the cafes where I had graded papers late into the night, the parks where I had walked with Robert when he was a little boy. The campus itself was buzzing with energy, a vibrant sea of black gowns and cheering families. Parents were trying to pin mortar boards on their children's heads, taking endless photos, their faces alight with pride. I saw them and felt a sharp stab of longing for what I was denied, the simple, uncomplicated joy of being a grandmother in the crowd. But my path today was different. The driver didn't take me to the main parking lot, crowded with the cars of thousands of families. He followed a private road that led to the back of the Chancellor's Hall, pulling up to a discreet entrance marked for staff and honored guests. Alistair Finch was there to greet me, his face wreathed in a genuine, welcoming smile. He looked distinguished in his formal academic robes, the university's golden crest gleaming on his chest. "Jen, you look magnificent," he said, taking both my hands in his. "Absolutely magnificent. The conquering hero returns." "Hardly a hero, Alistair," I said with a small laugh. "Just an old professor who scrubbed up for the occasion." "Nonsense. You're the heart of this university's ethos, and it's high time everyone knew it." He led me inside, not to the sweltering, crowded auditorium where families were jostling for seats, but to a quiet, elegant suite reserved for the speakers. There was a platter of pastries, a pot of fresh coffee, and a vanity mirror with bright lights. "Your green room, my lady," he said with a theatrical bow. "Make yourself comfortable. The procession will begin in about an hour." Left alone in the quiet room, the muffled sounds of the growing crowd a distant murmur, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the day. My heart was a tumultuous mix of nerves, sadness, and a fierce, exhilarating sense of vindication. I thought of Charlotte, and Robert, and Leo, out there somewhere in the sea of faces, completely oblivious. I imagined their arrival. Charlotte, no doubt, dressed in some impeccably tasteful but attention-grabbing designer outfit, complaining about the parking, Robert trailing placidly in her wake, and Leo, handsome and proud in his gown, a little embarrassed by his mother's fussing. They would find their seats, scan the program, and see the keynote speaker listed as Dr. Genevieve Ainsworth. The name would mean nothing to them. They had never once thought to ask what my professional name was, or what the A in my signature stood for. To them, I was Genevieve, a name as plain and simple as the life they thought I led. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara, my grandniece, Robert's cousin's daughter. Clara was a bright, perceptive young woman in her first year at Northwood, and she was the only member of the family who saw through Charlotte's pretenses. She was my secret ally, my spy in the enemy camp. Woman. They just arrived. Charlotte is in full peacock mode. Leo looks nervous. They have an empty seat next to them. I asked where you were, and Charlotte said you weren't feeling well. The lie was so obvious it hurt. "I'm so sorry, Aunt General." A fresh wave of anger washed over me, sharp and clean. Not feeling well. It was the perfect, unassailable excuse, painting her as the concerned matriarch, and me as the frail, unreliable old woman. It was a lie designed to elicit sympathy for her. I typed back a reply, my fingers flying across the screen. "Don't you worry about me, my dear. I'm feeling better than I have in years. Just keep your eyes on the stage. I think you'll enjoy the show." A knock on the door startled me. A young aide from the president's office peeked in. "Dr. Ainsworth? 5 minutes until the academic procession lines up." This was it. I took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a victim. She was not frail or forgotten. Her eyes, though lined with the fine map of age, were clear and bright. She was Dr. Genevieve Ainsworth, and she was about to give the speech of her life. I smoothed down the silk of my gown, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked out to take my place in the procession, ready to step out of the shadows and into the light. Joining the academic procession was like stepping into a slow-moving river of tradition. The air was thick with the scent of old wool and new beginnings. I was positioned near the front, just behind the university deans, and right beside Alistair Finch. He gave me a reassuring wink as we began our solemn march from the cool, stone corridors of the Chancellor's building out into the dazzling sunlight and toward the massive outdoor amphitheater. The sound hit us first, a roar of applause and cheers from thousands of people, a wave of pure, unadulterated joy. For a moment, I was just one of the many robed figures, an anonymous participant in a timeless ritual. But as we ascended the steps to the enormous stage, I could feel the individual gazes of the crowd, 1,000 points of curiosity. My assigned seat was a large carved oak chair at the center of the stage, a place of honor. From this vantage point, the audience became a vast, undulating sea of faces, a tapestry of hope, pride, and relief. I scanned the section where Clara had told me they would be sitting. It took me a moment, but then I found them. Even from this distance, Charlotte was unmistakable. She was a slash of bright fuchsia in a sea of more muted tones, her posture rigid, her head held high. My son, Robert, sat beside her, looking slightly overwhelmed, a placid island in the turbulent waters of his wife's ambition, and there, between them, was Leo. My Leo. His face was a mask of nervous excitement, his eyes scanning the crowd, his mortarboard perched precariously on his thick, dark hair. And next to him, the empty chair. The seat where the unwell grandmother was supposed to be. It gaped like a wound, a physical manifestation of their lie. They hadn't seen me yet. To them, I was just another robed figure on a crowded stage, part of the academic scenery. The preliminary speeches began, the dean of students, the provost, each offering words of welcome and congratulations. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling a strange sense of dual existence. I was here, on this stage, a respected figure about to be honored. And I was also out there, in their minds, a frail old woman tucked away in a cottage, missing this milestone. The dissonance was jarring. Alistair leaned over and whispered, "Ready for your close-up, Jen?" I gave him a small, tight smile, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. Then, it was time. Alistair stepped to the podium, the crowd falling into a respectful hush. "Graduates, families, esteemed faculty," he began, his voice resonating through the amphitheater. "Each year, we are privileged to welcome a keynote speaker to share their wisdom with our graduating class. This year is particularly special. For over 2 decades, Northwood University has been the beneficiary of an extraordinary gift, the Phoenix Endowment." A murmur went through the crowd. The Phoenix Endowment was legendary on campus. It had transformed the university's ability to attract top-tier students, regardless of their financial circumstances. "The endowment was founded by an anonymous donor," Alistair continued, "an individual who believed, as we do, that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. The Phoenix Endowment was created to level the playing field, to find those brilliant, driven students who might otherwise be overlooked, and give them the wings to fly. Today, for the first time, the benefactor of this transformative gift has agreed to step into the light. She is one of the most influential sociologists of her generation, a trailblazer whose work has reshaped our understanding of social mobility. She is a Northwood alumna, a former honorary doctorate recipient, and a dear friend. He paused, letting the anticipation build. I could see Leo lean forward slightly, a flicker of interest on his face. Charlotte, however, looked bored, subtly checking her watch. This was just another tedious part of the ceremony to be endured before the celebratory lunch. It is my profound honor, Alistair's voice boomed, to introduce you to the founder of the Phoenix Endowment and your 2025 commencement speaker, Dr. Genevieve Ainsworth. He turned and gestured toward me. As I rose from my chair and walked the few steps to the podium, a camera projected my image onto the two enormous screens flanking the stage. And in that moment, the world shifted. Out in the audience, time seemed to freeze for the Ainsworth family. Robert was the first to react. He blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. He nudged his wife, pointing vaguely toward the stage. "Charlotte," he mumbled, that looks an awful lot like Mom." Charlotte followed his gaze, first with irritation, then with disbelief. Her perfectly made-up face went slack, her mouth falling slightly open. On the giant screen, the woman she knew as a frumpy gardener in sensible shoes stood tall and serene in a gown of shimmering sapphire, her face composed and elegant. The nameplate on the podium read, Dr. Genevieve Ainsworth. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a physical blow, the secret academic past. The dusty books on her shelf. The name. It was her. It was General. But it was Leo's reaction that would forever be seared into my memory. I saw him from the stage, saw the moment his eyes locked on my image on the screen. He recoiled as if he'd been struck. His face, just moments before alight with graduate pride, turned ashen. He looked from the screen to the stage, then back to the screen, his mind struggling to reconcile the two realities. His grandmother. The one he'd been told was at home, too sick to attend. The one he hadn't bothered to call himself. There she was, larger than life, being introduced as the university's revered, secret benefactor. The arts program that funded his thesis, her. The empty seat beside him. His lie, his mother's lie. The shame that flooded his face was so potent, so absolute, that I could feel it even from 100 yards away. He sank back in his chair, his eyes wide with a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. He didn't look at his mother. He couldn't. He just stared at me, his world completely upended. Charlotte grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "This can't be happening," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper lost in the sudden, thunderous applause that erupted throughout the amphitheater. I stood at the podium, letting the applause wash over me before it subsided into an expectant silence. I looked out over the sea of faces, a kaleidoscope of youth and promise, and I allowed my gaze to linger for just a fraction of a second on my family. Charlotte was frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Robert looked utterly lost, as if the ground had given way beneath him, and Leo looked broken. He had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. I took a slow, deliberate breath and began to speak, my voice calm and clear, amplified to fill every corner of the vast space. President Finch, members of the board, faculty, proud families, and most importantly, the graduating class of 2025. I started, my tone warm and measured. It is a profound and unexpected honor to be standing here today. When President Finch first called me Dr. Ainsworth a few moments ago, I confess it took me a second to respond. For the past decade, most people have simply known me as Jen, a woman who has a passable talent for growing roses and a questionable habit of talking to her cat. It is a quiet life, and a good one, but it is not the only life I have led. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Before I was General the gardener, I was Genevieve, the sociologist. I spent 40 years studying the intricate, often invisible architecture of our society. I studied the ladders people climb and the walls they run into. And the most important lesson I learned, the one I want to share with you today, is this. No one, and I mean no one, builds their life alone. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Charlotte flinch. Her entire life was a testament to the myth of the self-made individual, a carefully constructed image of success achieved through sheer will and superior taste. We live in a culture that worships the idea of the self-made man or woman, I continued, my voice gaining strength. The solo genius. The lone wolf entrepreneur. We are told to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. It's a powerful and seductive narrative. But it is the most dangerous fiction we have ever told ourselves. Because it allows us to believe that success is solely a product of our own merit. And it allows us to look at those who are struggling and believe it is solely a product of their own deficits. It is a fiction that breeds arrogance in the fortunate and shame in the unfortunate. It is a fiction that allows us to forget the hands that steadied the ladder for us, the shoulders we stood on, the doors that were held open by unseen benefactors. I paused, taking a sip of water, my eyes sweeping across the young faces before me. Every one of you graduating today is a triumph of talent and tenacity. You have worked tirelessly. You have sacrificed. But you did not do it alone. You were lifted by the parents who packed your lunches and paid your tuition, sometimes at great cost to themselves. You were guided by the professors who stayed late to explain a difficult concept. You were supported by the friends who brought you coffee during all-night study sessions. And many of you, like I once was, were helped by the quiet generosity of scholarships, gifts from strangers who believed in your potential before you ever set foot on this campus. The Phoenix Endowment was my attempt to be one of those quiet hands, to honor the anonymous people who once did the same for me. I saw Leo lift his head. His face was pale and tear-streaked. He was looking right at me, his expression one of raw, unfiltered agony. He was finally understanding. This wasn't just a speech, it was a lesson directed at him, for him. The name, Phoenix, was chosen for a reason. It is a symbol of rebirth from ashes. But we must be careful not to romanticize the fire. It is better to prevent the fire in the first place. It is better to build a society where a person's potential is not determined by the zip code they were born in, by the accent they have, or by the social status of their parents. Success should not be a prize won in a lottery of birth. It should be a destination reachable by all who are willing to make the journey. And so, graduates, as you leave here today, clutching your hard-earned diplomas, ready to build your own lives, I ask you to do one thing. Remember to send the elevator back down. When you are in a position of power, do not lock the door behind you. When you have a seat at the table, pull up another chair for someone else. Your success will not be measured by the height of the walls you build to protect your own prosperity, but by the number of bridges you build to share it. That is the true measure of a life well lived, not what you accumulate, but what you contribute. To that end, I said, turning to look at Alistair, who was beaming, I have one final announcement. After seeing the incredible work done by this year's Phoenix Scholars, and the remarkable initiatives this university has championed, I have decided, effective today, to match the original endowment, thereby doubling the fund for all the years to come. A gasp rippled through the audience, followed by an explosion of applause so loud it felt like a physical force. The students, in particular, were ecstatic, many of them leaping to their feet. It was a standing ovation. In the midst of the thunderous noise, I looked back at my family. Robert was clapping, a look of dazed, bewildered pride on his face. He was finally seeing his mother, perhaps for the first time. Charlotte was not clapping. She sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a storm of rage and humiliation. The world she had so carefully constructed had just been publicly dismantled by the one person she had dismissed as utterly insignificant. And Leo, my grandson, simply wept, his head bowed, the sound of the ovation, a deafening roar of his own failure. The moment the ceremony concluded with the traditional recessional march, Chaos erupted for the Ainsworths. It was as if a dam of social propriety had burst, while I was immediately enveloped by a swarm of well-wishers on stage. Beaming faculty members, tearful Phoenix scholars, university trustees wanting to shake my hand. My family was trapped in their seats, marooned on an island of their own making. Their cell phones, which had been respectfully silent during the ceremony, began to light up like a switchboard. Robert's phone buzzed incessantly with texts from his cousins and old family friends. "Was that your mother? Why didn't you tell us?" "Genevieve Ainsworth. I had no idea." He stared at the screen, overwhelmed, unable to form a coherent response. Charlotte's experience was far worse. Her phone was a torrent of messages from the very society mavens she sought to impress. The texts were a mix of feigned surprise and thinly veiled mockery. "Darling, your mother-in-law. How fabulous. You must be so proud," read one from a woman she considered her primary social rival. The subtext was clear. "You kept this a secret? Or did you not know, which is worse?" Another text from a fellow country club member was more direct. "Saw the empty seat beside you. Hope everything is all right." They knew. Of course they knew. The story was already writing itself. Charlotte Ainsworth, the great social climber, had snubbed her own mother-in-law, who turned out to be the most celebrated person at the event. It was a social catastrophe of epic proportions. "We have to go. Now," Charlotte hissed at Robert, grabbing her purse. Her face was chalky, her hands trembling with rage. The fuchsia dress that had seemed so confident and bold now looked garish and desperate. "Go where? What about Leo?" Robert asked, gesturing to his son, who was still sitting motionlessly, staring blankly at the now empty stage. "He can meet us at the car," she snapped. "We are not staying for the reception. We are not going to the Oak Room. We are going home." Her perfect day, her perfect son's perfect celebration, was a smoldering ruin, and her only instinct was to flee the scene of the crime. Clara, my grandniece, chose that moment to approach them. Her young face was a picture of righteous fury. "That was quite a speech, wasn't it?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Amazing how well Aunt Jen recovered from her illness." Charlotte shot her a look that could curdle milk. "This does not concern you, Clara." "It concerns me when my family lies and treats one of our own with such disgusting cruelty," Clara retorted, standing her ground. "You must be so proud of yourselves." She didn't wait for a reply, turning on her heel and walking away, leaving them in a cloud of their own shame. Finally, Leo stirred. He stood up slowly, mechanically, his movements stiff and robotic. He didn't look at his parents. "I have to talk to her," he said, his voice hoarse. "Don't be ridiculous, Leo," Charlotte commanded. "Look at that mob scene. You'll never get through. We're leaving." "No," he said, and for the first time, a flicker of defiance sparked in his eyes. "I am going to talk to my grandmother." He started pushing his way through the departing crowd, heading toward the stage, a salmon swimming against a powerful current of humanity. Robert and Charlotte, left with no other choice, reluctantly followed him. Their attempt to reach me was a pathetic spectacle. I saw them coming. A small, miserable procession fighting its way toward the stage. By now, the press had arrived. Reporters from the local paper and the university alumni magazine. A young woman with a microphone was asking me how it felt to finally reveal my identity. I was answering her, smiling, when I saw Leo break through the last ring of people. "Grandma?" he called out, his voice cracking. His timing could not have been worse. Several heads turned. A photographer, sensing a human interest angle, swung his camera around. Alistair, ever the diplomat, stepped smoothly between us. "Leo, congratulations, my boy." "A fine achievement," he said, shaking Leo's hand with a grip of iron, effectively halting his advance. "Your grandmother is justifiably proud, as are we all. We must let her speak to the press for a moment, but we'll see you at the president's reception, of course." Charlotte and Robert had caught up, hovering awkwardly behind their son. Charlotte tried to catch my eye, to offer some sort of placating smile, but I looked right through her, my expression pleasant but unseeing, as if she were a complete stranger. I turned my attention back to the reporter. The dismissal was absolute, a public reflection of the very exclusion she had subjected me to. It was not planned, but it was devastatingly effective. She visibly recoiled, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. Humiliated and thwarted, they had no choice but to retreat, swallowed back up by the crowd. The power dynamic had been irrevocably reversed. I was the sun around which they now orbited, and they had just been burned by the glare. While I was being escorted by Alistair to the president's reception, a warm, sunlit affair in a walled garden where champagne flowed, and congratulations were offered in a dozen languages, my family was making their own retreat. I learned the details later from a remorseful Robert and a still-shaken Clara, but I could picture it with perfect, painful clarity. Their walk back to the car was a gauntlet of whispers and averted eyes. The fuchsia of Charlotte's dress now seemed to scream her shame. Every smiling family they passed felt like a personal indictment. By the time they reached their luxury SUV, parked miles away in a distant lot, the silence among them had become toxic. A fourth passenger in the car. Charlotte slammed her door shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous parking structure. Robert fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling. Leo slumped into the back seat, pulling his graduation gown tight around him as if it were a shroud. "Well," Charlotte finally spat, her voice tight with venom as Robert navigated the post-ceremony traffic. "I hope you're happy, Robert. This is what happens when you don't manage your mother." Robert, who for decades had placated and deferred, finally snapped. "Manage her? Manage her? She just donated millions of dollars to the university and received a 10-minute standing ovation. Charlotte, maybe she's the one who should be managing us." "Oh, don't be a fool," she retorted, turning in her seat to face him. "This was a performance. A calculated, vicious public attack designed to humiliate us. She planned this whole thing. She planned to be a celebrated academic and a secret philanthropist. She's been planning that since before I was born." Robert's voice rose, cracking with a lifetime of repressed frustration. "We're the ones who look like fools. We lied and told everyone she was sick. We left an empty chair for the guest of honor. My God, Charlotte, do you have any idea how we looked?" In the back seat, Leo let out a choked sob. "She wasn't sick," he whispered, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I could have called her. I should have called her. Mom, why did you tell me we didn't have enough tickets?" The question, so simple and direct, hung in the air. It was the question that dismantled everything. Charlotte's face crumpled. For the first time, her ironclad certainty wavered. She had no clever retort, no sophisticated excuse. She had been caught in a simple, ugly lie by her own son. I thought it would be better," she stammered, her voice losing its sharp edge, becoming thin and reedy. "She doesn't enjoy these things. She's always so out of place. I wanted the day to be perfect for you, Leo. I wanted it to be about us." "It was never about me," Leo said, his voice flat and dead. "It was always about you. It was about your friends and your image and your perfect family portrait. Grandma was never good enough for that portrait, was she? She wasn't glossy enough. She wasn't wearing the right brand." He looked at his hands, then out the window at the university disappearing behind them. The Phoenix Endowment, the arts program that paid for my entire final project, that was her. All this time she was helping me. She was making my success possible, and I was too embarrassed to bring my friends to her house because it smelled like old books. The raw truth of his confessions silenced them all. The weight of it was suffocating. Robert drove on, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The reservation for 4 at the Oak Room, made weeks in advance, was a ghost haunting them. There would be no celebratory lunch. There was nothing to celebrate. They drove home, not to their sprawling house that was a monument to Charlotte's social aspirations, but to 3 separate, silent islands of misery. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect Ainsworth family, shattered beyond repair. I, meanwhile, was holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by life and laughter. A young woman with bright, intelligent eyes came up to me. "Dr. Ainsworth? I'm Maya. I'm a Phoenix scholar. I'm the first person in my family to finish university. I'm going to medical school because of you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You changed my life." I took her hand, my own heart swelling with an emotion so pure and profound it almost brought me to my knees. This was real. This was what mattered. The petty drama of my family, the years of slights and snubs, all of it faded into the background, rendered insignificant by the brilliant, shining reality of this young woman's future. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer defined me. I had built bridges, not walls, and standing in that garden I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely and utterly at home. 2 days passed. They were days of profound peace for me, and, I would later learn, of tumultuous crisis for my son's family. I spent the time in my garden, my hands in the soil, feeling the comforting rhythm of the earth. I answered congratulatory emails, and took a long, lovely call with Clara, who recounted every delicious detail of the fallout. I felt no triumph, only a quiet, somber sense of accounts being settled. I did not hear from Robert, Charlotte, or Leo. I didn't. Ahio crest expectu, the ball was in their court, but I suspected they didn't even know what game they were playing anymore. On the third evening, as dusk was settling, casting long shadows across my lawn, I saw a figure walking up my garden path. It was Leo. He was alone. He was not wearing his usual uniform of designer jeans and a trendy jacket. He was in a simple gray sweatshirt, his hair uncombed, his face pale and drawn. He looked like the little boy I remembered, the one who used to come to me with scraped knees and a vulnerable heart. He stopped a few feet from my porch, looking uncertain, as if he might bolt at any moment. I didn't speak. I simply sat in my wicker chair, waiting. "Grandma," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Leo," I replied, my tone even. He took a few more steps forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Can I sit down?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me. He sat stiffly on the edge of it, not looking at me, his eyes fixed on a rosebush. For a long minute the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. "I am so sorry," he finally breathed out, the words seeming to tear their way out of him. "There's nothing else to say, there's no excuse, I'm just sorry." I remained silent, letting his apology settle in the space between us. I needed to know it was more than just the shame of being caught. "I have been a fool," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Worse than a fool. I've been arrogant and weak and cruel. I let Mom's ideas get into my head. I started to believe that the things she values are the things that matter. I started to see you through her eyes. And I am so ashamed." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were filled with a pain that was genuine and deep. "You were my favorite person in the world when I was a kid. Your house was magic. And I threw that away for what? To be popular? To fit in?" "Your mother wanted you to have a certain kind of life, Leo," I said quietly, not to excuse but to understand. "She believes in the power of appearances. She believes in walls," he shot back bitterly. "She builds them around everything. And she taught me to do the same. And the worst part is, the person I walled off was you. The one person who was secretly building a foundation under my feet the whole time." He shook his head, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "Do you know how that feels, Grandma? To find out your entire success is owed to the person you have been actively disrespecting? It feels like drowning." Now, I felt a stirring of the old affection, the deep, grandmotherly love that had been bruised but not broken. "I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything, Leo," I said gently. "The endowment was never about gratitude. It was about opportunity. But respect isn't about money," he insisted, leaning forward, his eyes pleading with me. "It's about seeing people for who they are. And I didn't see you. I looked, but I didn't see." After the ceremony, Mom and Dad had a huge fight. I think they might. I don't know. Everything is broken. Mom is locked in her room, and Dad is just wandering around the house like a ghost. He said he's been letting her run his life for 30 years, and he doesn't even know who he is anymore. "And who are you, Leo?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked down at his hands again. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, "but I know who I don't want to be." I don't want to be someone who measures people's worth by their address or their clothes. I don't want to be someone who is ashamed of his own grandmother. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. Can you ever forgive me? Can we start again? I reached out and placed my hand over his. His skin was cold. Forgiveness is a process, Leo. And starting again means building something new, not pretending the old structure isn't in ruins. It has to be built on honesty this time. On both sides. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. But yes, we can try to build something new. He let out a shuddering breath of relief. And for the first time, he met my gaze with a glimmer of the open-hearted boy I had missed for so long. The path forward would be long, but for the first time in years it felt like we were finally walking in the same direction. A year can change everything. The Ainsworth family that had left the graduation in disgrace did not survive the impact. As Leo had predicted, his parents' marriage, a structure already weakened by years of unspoken resentments and skewed priorities, crumbled. Charlotte could not forgive Robert for his lack of loyalty to her narrative, and Robert could no longer stomach the person he had become in her shadow. Their separation was quiet and civilized, a final performance of decorum, but it was absolute. Charlotte kept the large house, a lonely queen in a castle of her own making. Robert moved into a modest apartment in the city, and in a move that surprised everyone, started volunteering at a local history museum, reconnecting with a passion he'd buried for decades. My own life blossomed in ways I never could have anticipated. The anonymity I had cherished for so long was gone, and in its place was a new kind of purpose. I accepted a position on the board of the Phoenix Endowment and took an active role in mentoring the scholars. These bright, hungry minds became a source of immense joy. They filled my cottage with laughter and debate, their energy a vibrant antidote to the years of quiet isolation. I traveled. I gave lectures in London and attended conferences in Kyoto. I was no longer Dr. Ainsworth in the past tense. I was fully, presently, and joyfully myself. The sapphire gown was joined by other beautiful things in my closet, not for show but for the simple pleasure of wearing them. My relationship with Leo was the most precious thing to be rebuilt from the wreckage. He was true to his word. He became a regular visitor to the cottage, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire for connection. We worked in the garden together. He told me about his new job at a small, innovative architectural firm, one that focused on sustainable community projects rather than lavish private homes. He was earning less than his mother had hoped, but his eyes shone with a passion I hadn't seen since he was a child. He was building bridges, not walls. He never spoke ill of his mother, but there was a quiet sadness in him whenever she was mentioned. He visited her, but their conversations were strained, polite circles around the gaping hole in their relationship. Charlotte had never reached out to me. She had never offered an apology. Her pride was a fortress too high to scale, and she remained a willing prisoner inside it. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the graduation, Leo came to my cottage with a large portfolio under his arm. "I have something to show you," he said, his expression a mix of nervousness and pride. He unrolled a set of architectural drawings on my dining room table. They were beautiful, elegant designs for a new student center on the Northwood campus. "It's a proposal for the university," he explained. "The firm is submitting it next week. It's for a new building, a place for students to collaborate and study, a place for everyone." I looked closer at the title block on the drawing. The project was named the Ainsworth Center. "Leo," I whispered, my heart aching with love for this young man. "I want to build things that matter, Grandma," he said, his voice earnest. "I want to build things that last, things that bring people together, like you do." He pointed to a detail on the plans, a wide, welcoming entrance hall. "This main space, I want to dedicate it to you. A place where your story is told, so that no one ever forgets that the strongest foundations are the ones you can't always see." I looked from the drawings to my grandson's face, a face now full of character and integrity. The pain of the past had receded, replaced by a profound and overwhelming gratitude. The keynote speech I had given was about sending the elevator back down. I had never imagined that the person who would take that message most to heart would be my own grandson. and that he would use it not just to build a career, but to build a legacy of his own. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of books and roses, with the plans for a new beginning spread out before me, I knew the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't in a bank account or a trust fund. It was right here, in this cottage, in this precious, hard-won second chance. My new life, my real life, had truly begun. Charlotte's world, once a bustling stage for her social theater, had become a silent museum. The sprawling house, which had once felt like the epicenter of her universe, now felt like a mausoleum for a life that had died. The silence was the loudest thing in it. It screamed from the empty dining room, designed for lavish dinner parties that no longer happened. It echoed in the bourgeois, formal living room, where the dusty, unread books, my books, still stood as silent accusers on their high shelf. She maintained the facade, of course. The gardeners still came on Tuesdays, the cleaners on Fridays. She dressed impeccably each day, in crisp linens and expensive silks, as if preparing for an audience that never arrived. Her social media profile still projected an image of effortless elegance, a photo of a single, perfect peony from her garden, a shot of an artfully arranged cheese board for one. But the reality was a hollow ache of loneliness. Her friends, the ones who had formed the chorus of her social life, had slowly, subtly drifted away. They were polite when they saw her at the grocery store, but the invitations to luncheons and charity galas had dwindled and then stopped altogether. A social catastrophe, she had learned, was like a contagious disease. No one wanted to stand too close for too long. Her days fell into a rigid, joyless routine. Mornings were for emails and managing her investments. Afternoons were for long, punishing sessions on the Peloton bike in her home gym, her anger and frustration fueling her workouts. Evenings were the worst. She would pour a single, perfect glass of Chardonnay and wander through the cavernous rooms of her house, a ghost haunting the scenes of her former triumphs. One evening, scrolling through her tablet, a photo ambushed her. It was on Clara's public feed. My grandniece had posted a picture from a weekend visit to my cottage. In the photo, Leo and I were laughing, our heads close together over a pot of steaming clam chowder, the light from my kitchen window making our hair shine. We looked unguarded, easy, and deeply happy. Behind us, on the wall, was a corkboard overflowing with postcards from my travels, photos of my Phoenix scholars, and a new picture of Robert, smiling, standing proudly next to a dusty diorama at the History Museum. Charlotte stared at the photo, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the tablet. It was a portrait of a family, vibrant and connected. And she was not in it. She was the architect of her own exile. She saw their laughter, and all she could feel was the bitter sting of its absence in her own life. She saw Robert's simple, genuine smile and contrasted it with the tense, placating expression he had worn for the last decade of their marriage. She saw the rich, messy, joyful life that was flourishing in her absence, a life that had sprouted from the very ground she had salted. With a cry of rage, she hurled the tablet across the room. It struck the wall with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor, the screen dark. The silence that rushed back in was even more profound than before. She stood in the middle of her perfect, silent living room, surrounded by expensive furniture and curated art, and she had never felt so impoverished. She walked to the bookshelf and, for the first time in years, reached for one of my books. It was Invisible Walls. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The inscription on the inside, written in my familiar script 20 years ago, read, "For Charlotte, may you always build bridges, not walls. With love, Genevieve." She had never read past the inscription. She sank onto a silk-upholstered sofa, the book open in her lap, and as the last light of day faded outside her large, immaculate windows, she began to read the words of the woman she had tried so hard to erase. The words were not an accusation. They were an explanation. They were a map of the world she had failed to understand, and a testament to the woman she had refused to see. For the first time, alone in the echoing silence of her self-imposed prison, a single, difficult tear escaped and fell onto the page. It was a tear not of anger or self-pity, but of a terrifying, dawning awareness. The walls she had built were not to keep others out. They were to keep herself in. Robert found that the quiet rhythm of his new life suited him. The dust of the History Museum felt more real, more substantial than the sterile polish of his former home. He was cataloging artifacts from the town's founding, his hands touching the real, tangible past. In doing so, he was slowly coming to terms with his own. He realized that for 30 years he had been an artifact himself, carefully curated and displayed by Charlotte, his own passions and personalities stored away in a back room. The shame of his complicity in my exclusion was a heavy coat he wore every day. He hadn't just been a bystander. He had been a willing accomplice, choosing the path of least resistance, which was always the path Charlotte paved. His silence had been a form of consent. The memory of my face on that giant screen, serene and powerful, played in his mind on a loop, a constant reminder of the woman he had failed to stand up for, his own mother. After several weeks of wrestling with his cowardice, he picked up the phone. Dialing my number felt like lifting a 100-pound weight. "Hello?" My voice was warm, familiar. "Mom, it's Robert." There was a slight pause. It wasn't cold, but it was weighted. "Robert, it's good to hear from you." "Is it?" he asked, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I wouldn't blame you if it wasn't." "I'm your mother." "It will always be good to hear your voice," I said, and the simple sincerity of it made his throat tighten. "How are you, Robert?" "I'm okay. I'm living in the city now. Charlotte and we separated." "I know," I said gently. "Leo told me. I'm sorry if it's been difficult." "It's been necessary," he said, surprising himself with his own honesty. "Mom, I need to say something. I should have said it a year ago. I should have said it 10 years ago. I am so sorry. For everything. For the graduation, yes, but for all the years before it. For every time I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up. For every time I let you be dismissed or belittled. I was a coward, and there's no excuse for it." He had rehearsed the speech in his head 100 times, but saying the words out loud made them real, solidifying the shape of his own failure. He expected anger or lectures, or at the very least, a cool disappointment. Instead, I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you for telling me that, Robert. That means a great deal to me." "That's it?" he asked, confused by the lack of recrimination. "What else would there be?" I replied. "I can't change the past, and you can't either. All we can do is decide how to act in the present. Your apology is a choice in the present. It's a brave one." The word brave struck him. It was not a word he had ever associated with himself. "I'd like to see you, if that would be all right," he said, his voice gaining a bit of confidence. "I'd like to, I don't know, just talk, see your garden." "I'd like that very much," I said. "Come on Sunday. Leo is coming for lunch. I'll make a big pot of soup." When Robert arrived at my cottage that Sunday, it felt like visiting a foreign country he'd only ever seen on postcards. The air smelled of lavender and baking bread. Leo greeted him at the door with a hug that was warm and uncomplicated, a gesture of forgiveness that Robert felt he hadn't yet earned. Lunch was not a tense affair. It was normal. We talked about his work at the museum, about Leo's architectural project, about my upcoming trip to Greece. There were no accusations, no walking on eggshells. For the first time, Robert felt like he was a part of his family, not as a placeholder, but as himself. After lunch, while Leo cleared the dishes, I took Robert out to the garden. He looked at the riot of color, the thriving, chaotic beauty of it all. "Charlotte always hated this garden," he said quietly. "She said it was unruly." "It is unruly," I said with a smile. "That's why I love it. Things grow where they want to grow. You can't control everything." I looked at him, my son, a man in his 50s who was only just learning to be his own person. "It's good to see you, Robert. Really see you." He met my gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look away in shame. He looked at me with the clear, honest eyes of a man who was finally ready to stop apologizing for the past and start building a new future. The news that Leo's firm had won the bid for the new student center sent a ripple of joy through our small, reconstituted family. It was more than a professional victory. It was a symbolic triumph. The Ainsworth Center, a name Leo had insisted upon, was going to be a real, physical place on the Northwood campus, a testament to the family's new, hard-won values. Alistair Finch was delighted. "It's poetry, Jen," he'd boomed over the phone. "Your grandson, designing a building in your name, funded in part by your endowment. It's a legacy that builds its own legacy." The project consumed Leo, but it was a joyful obsession. He brought the blueprints and material samples to my cottage, spreading them out on the dining table. We would spend hours debating the merits of reclaimed wood versus polished concrete, the placement of windows to maximize natural light, the design of quiet alcoves for study and open, airy spaces for collaboration. I was not an architect, but he valued my perspective, the perspective of a sociologist and an educator. "A building speaks, Grandma," he'd say, his pencil flying across a sketchpad. "It tells people what's important. It can make you feel small and intimidated, or it can make you feel welcomed and inspired. I want every student who walks in here to feel like they belong." He was designing a building that was the antithesis of Charlotte's home. There were no formal, intimidating spaces. The lines were clean and inviting. The central feature was a vast, open atrium, with a living wall of green plants that stretched up 3 stories. He called it the Bridge Atrium. One afternoon, he brought over a rendering of the entryway. He had designed a long wall of etched glass upon which the names of every Phoenix scholar, past and present, would be inscribed. "It's the first thing people will see when they walk in," he explained, his eyes shining. "Not the names of the big donors in huge letters, the names of the students. The real legacy." I was deeply moved. He had understood the very core of my philosophy and was translating it into glass and steel. But I had an idea of my own. "It's beautiful, Leo," I said, "but it's missing something. Or rather, someone." I took a piece of tracing paper and a pencil. A legacy isn't just about success. It's about the journey. What if, on a panel right beside this one, we etch a single line from a book? A line that explains why this place exists. I wrote it out for him. "We live in a culture that worships the idea of the self-made man or woman. It is the most dangerous fiction we have ever told ourselves. And beneath it, the attribution, invisible walls." Leo looked at the words, then back at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Grandma, that's brilliant. It's the mission statement. It's the why." He integrated the idea into the final design. The entrance to the Ainsworth Center would now feature 2 powerful statements side by side. The names of those who had been lifted up, and the words that challenged the very idea that anyone should need lifting in the first place. Working with Leo on this project was a gift. It was a tangible act of creation, a way of building something beautiful and lasting out of the rubble of the past. Robert would often join us, offering his historical perspective on the campus architecture, his quiet confidence growing with each contribution. We were becoming a team, our 3 distinct personalities weaving together to create something stronger than any of us were alone. We were laying a new foundation, not of concrete and steel, but of mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that had been tested and proven true. The Ainsworth Center wasn't just a building, it was the blueprint of us. The official announcement of the Ainsworth Center was made in the Northwood University Alumni Magazine and the city's main newspaper. It was a splashy, 2-page feature. There was a large, glossy photo of the architectural rendering of the building, its glass atrium gleaming with promise. There was a photo of a proud Alistair Finch shaking hands with a confident-looking Leo. And there was a photo of me, standing in my unruly garden, smiling, the article celebrating my ongoing legacy and philanthropic vision. The story was a narrative of renewal, community, and forward-thinking vision. For Charlotte, it was an execution. A former friend, likely out of a sense of pity or a desire to deliver a well-aimed blow, had mailed her a copy of the magazine. It arrived on a Tuesday, along with the usual collection of high-end catalogs and solicitations. She saw the university logo on the envelope and opened it with a sense of detached curiosity. When she unfolded the magazine and saw the feature, the blood drained from her face. She read the article 3 times. Each word was a tiny, sharp stone, striking the fragile glass of her composure. The building was not just named the Ainsworth Center. The article specifically referenced my work, my philosophy, and my vision. It quoted Leo, her son, speaking with eloquent passion about his grandmother's influence on his design and his life's purpose. It even quoted Robert, her ex-husband, in his new capacity as a consulting local historian for the project, talking about the importance of campus architecture that fosters inclusivity. They were all there, the family she had once commanded, now reassembled in a new configuration, thriving in a world she had no part in. They were building a legacy together, and the name on that legacy, Ainsworth, was now irrevocably tied to me, not to the social standing she had spent a lifetime curating. It was the ultimate erasure. She had tried to snip a single thread from the family tapestry, and in doing so, had unraveled her entire section, while the rest of the tapestry was being rewoven into something stronger and more beautiful without her. She walked through her silent, cavernous house, the magazine clutched in her hand. She looked at the designer furniture, the abstract paintings, the perfectly fluffed pillows. They were props. They were the hollow artifacts of a life that valued things over people. She had built her kingdom on a foundation of sand, and the tide had finally come in, washing it all away, leaving her stranded. The anger she had nurtured for a year had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, gray ash of despair. There was no one left to blame. She couldn't blame Robert for finding his own voice. She couldn't blame Leo for choosing respect over appearances. And she could no longer blame me for her humiliation. My speech at the graduation hadn't been an attack. It had been a statement of fact. She was the one who had turned it into a weapon against herself through her own actions. She stopped in front of a large, ornate mirror in her foyer, a piece she had once prided herself on acquiring at an exclusive auction. She looked at her reflection. She saw a woman in an expensive silk blouse, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup artfully applied, but her eyes were empty. She was 61 years old, divorced, estranged from her son, and utterly profoundly alone. The Ainsworth Center would stand for 100 years. Its cornerstone would be laid, its atrium would fill with students, and its legacy would grow, all without her. She could continue to be a ghost, haunting the past, or she could do the single most difficult thing she had ever done in her life. She went to her bedroom, sat at her antique writing desk, and pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery. She picked up a fountain pen, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it. For a long time she just stared at the blank page. Then, slowly, with the agonizing effort of a person learning to write for the first time, she wrote 3 words. "Can we talk?" She folded the note, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to me at my cottage. She didn't trust herself to make a phone call. She didn't trust herself not to let her pride and anger poison her words. This note was a white flag. It was a small, desperate signal from a woman finally ready to surrender. The note arrived on a Thursday. The heavy cream envelope stood out from the usual bills and junk mail. I recognized the elegant, sharp penmanship immediately. My first instinct was a feeling of weariness. I had found such peace in the new shape of my life. A part of me did not want it disturbed by the turbulence that always seemed to surround Charlotte. But I thought of Leo, and of Robert, and of the broken piece of our family that she represented. I owed it to them, and perhaps even to myself, to see this through. I called her, "Tam." "Hello?" Her voice was thin, tentative. "Charlotte, it's Genevieve. I received your note." I heard a sharp intake of breath. "Thank you for calling." "You wanted to talk," I said, my voice gentle but not yielding. "Yes, I was wondering if I could come to the cottage." It was the same request Leo and Robert had made, the pilgrimage to the place she had once disdained. "Of course," I said. "When would be good for you?" She arrived the next afternoon driving the same luxury SUV, but she seemed diminished by it now. She wore a simple navy blue dress, a deliberate move away from her usual vibrant armor. She walked up the garden path with the hesitant steps of a trespasser. I met her on the porch, a neutral ground. We did not hug. We did not even shake hands. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her eyes fixed on my rose bushes. "Would you like some tea?" I asked. She nodded, and I led her into my kitchen, the heart of the home she had found so lacking. She sat at the small wooden table where my family now laughed and shared meals. She looked small in the chair. "Ah." I placed a mug of tea in front of her. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally she spoke, her voice low and unsteady. "I read your book," she said. "I waited. The one you inscribed for me. Invisible Walls." She looked up, and her eyes were raw with a pain that was, for the first time, not about her own social standing, but about something deeper. "You wrote that I should build bridges. All I did was build walls. And I'm so sorry, Genevieve. I know that word isn't enough. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I am sorry." "Why are you sorry, Charlotte?" I asked quietly. It was the most important question. Was she sorry for what she did, or was she just sorry she got caught? She seemed to understand the distinction. "I'm sorry because I was wrong," she said, her voice cracking. "I lived my whole life believing in a certain kind of strength, the strength of appearances, of control, of having the right things and knowing the right people. I saw your life, your choices, and I thought it was weakness. I thought you were less than. It made me feel powerful to think that, and that is a terrible, ugly thing." She took a shuddering breath. "And I taught my son to be the same way. I almost ruined him. I took the best parts of him, the parts that came from you and Robert, and I tried to stamp them out. That is what I am most sorry for." This was it. This was the truth. It was a confession of a flawed philosophy, a failed way of life. It was more than I had ever expected. "I hurt you," she continued, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her careful makeup. "At the graduation. I knew you would be hurt. But my own pride, my own embarrassment, was more important to me. I wanted to protect my perfect picture, and you didn't fit in it. It was a cruel thing to do, a monstrous thing." I looked at this woman, my daughter-in-law, the source of so much quiet pain in my life. And I did not feel anger. I did not even feel pity. I felt a profound sense of tragedy for the years she had wasted, for the love she had pushed away. "Yes," I said, my voice soft but clear. "It was very cruel. It broke something that I'm not sure can ever be fully repaired." She flinched at my honesty but nodded, accepting it. "I know, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally see it. I see you. And I see the wasteland I've made of my own life." I reached across the table and pushed the box of tissues toward her. "And what now, Charlotte?" "I don't know," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "I'm selling the house. There's no point in it anymore. I thought maybe I would travel. Or volunteer. I need to learn how to be a person, not a performance." She looked at me, her gaze direct and pleading for the first time. I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. I don't want to lose my son completely." "Leo loves you," I said. "But he is building a different kind of life now. If you want to be a part of it, you will have to learn how to live in it. It's not about grand gestures. It's about quiet, consistent, honest change." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my unruly, beautiful garden. "The foundation of my relationship with Leo and Robert is being rebuilt, Charlotte. It's slow, difficult work. It requires trust and patience. I don't know if you and I can ever build something like that. The ground between us is too broken." I turned back to her. "But forgiveness is not about fixing the past. It's about releasing it, so that you can have a different future. I am willing to release it. For my sake, and for Leo's. But the work of rebuilding your own life? That is work that only you can do." It wasn't a warm embrace. It wasn't an easy absolution. It was something far more valuable. It was a narrow, difficult path forward. A chance to start laying a single new stone on solid ground. For Charlotte, who had spent her life on shifting sands, it was everything. The day of the groundbreaking for the Ainsworth Center was bright and windswept. A small crowd had gathered on the lawn, where the building would soon stand. University trustees, faculty, a handful of reporters, and the proud, beaming faces of my Phoenix scholars. I stood between Robert and Leo, a solid, warm presence on either side of me. Robert, in a tweed jacket, looked more like a contented professor than a former executive. Leo, holding a ceremonial silver shovel, looked every bit the confident, visionary architect. He caught my eye and smiled, a shared look of triumph and love passing between us. Near the edge of the crowd, standing slightly apart, was Charlotte. She had come. Leo had invited her, a tentative step toward building a new bridge. She was dressed simply, in a gray coat, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked uncertain, a visitor in a world that was no longer hers to command. But she was here. She had shown up. It was a start. Alistair Finch made a short, eloquent speech about the university's future. Then he invited me and Leo to say a few words. Leo spoke first, his voice clear and strong, not about architecture, but about second chances, and about the grandmother who had taught him that the strongest structures are built on integrity. Then, it was my turn. I looked out at the small crowd, my gaze resting for a moment on each member of my fractured, healing family. A groundbreaking is an act of faith, I said. We stand on a piece of empty ground, and we imagine a future. We believe that from this soil, something of value will rise, something that will shelter and inspire generations to come. This building is a symbol of that faith. I looked toward Charlotte, who met my gaze for a brief, tremulous moment. But foundations are not just made of concrete and steel. The most important foundations are the ones we build between each other. They are made of honesty, respect, and the hard, necessary work of forgiveness. They can crack under pressure. They can be damaged by neglect. But they can also be repaired. They can be rebuilt, stronger and more true than they were before. Today we are not just breaking ground on a new building, I concluded. We are celebrating the choice to build a new future on a foundation of grace. Thank you. As applause broke out, Leo handed me the second silver shovel. Together, we walked to the designated spot of earth. Robert joined us. On a shared impulse, Leo looked over to his mother. He hesitated for only a second before giving her a small, encouraging nod. Slowly, tentatively, Charlotte walked over and stood beside Robert. The four of us, a family broken and remade, stood together, 4 hands on 2 shovels. We plunged them into the earth, turning over the first soil of a new beginning. It wasn't a perfect, storybook ending. The cracks in our foundation were still there, filled in with the mortar of difficult conversations and painful truths. But it was a foundation nonetheless. It was real. And as we looked out at the hopeful faces before us, on the empty ground where a bridge-filled atrium would soon rise, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was strong enough to build on. 5 years later, the Ainsworth Center stood not as a dream on paper, but as a living, breathing heart at the center of the Northwood campus. It was a masterpiece of glass and light, its bridge atrium soaring 3 stories high, the living wall of green plants thriving, a testament to Leo's vision. Students filled its sun-drenched lounges and quiet study nooks, their energy and ambition, the very lifeblood the building was designed to foster. Tonight was its official dedication gala. The air was crisp, the autumn sky studded with stars, and the building glowed from within, a lantern of hope and welcome. I stood near the entrance, beside the 2 etched glass walls that formed the soul of the building. On my right were the ever-growing names of the Phoenix scholars. On my left, the quote from Invisible Walls was subtly illuminated, a quiet challenge to all who entered. At 73, I felt a profound sense of peace. The years since the groundbreaking had been rich and full. I still traveled and lectured, but I spent more time at the cottage, content to mentor, write, and simply be. My greatest joy was watching my family, a fragile sapling that had grown into a sturdy tree, Leo, now a partner at his firm, was being hailed as one of the most promising architects of his generation. He moved with an easy confidence, his arm around a lovely young landscape architect he'd met during the project's construction. He was happy, truly happy, in a way that settled deep in his bones. Robert was beside me, his arm linked through mine. He was now the chief curator at the City Museum, his quiet passion having found its perfect expression. He'd met a kind, intelligent art historian, and their shared life was one of comfortable companionship and mutual respect. He was no longer a ghost in his own life. He was its curator. And then there was Charlotte. After selling the house, she had done something none of us expected. She had moved to a small apartment in a different city and enrolled in a university program to become a certified literacy tutor for underprivileged adults. She had spent 3 years learning, humbling herself, starting from scratch. She now ran a small, nonprofit tutoring center, a world away from the charity galas and country clubs she had once frequented. The work was difficult and often thankless, but it had reshaped her. The sharp, brittle edges had softened. She had found a new kind of purpose, not in being seen, but in helping others to read. Hlamaizia, Mishech Mila. She arrived tonight not with a flourish, but with a quiet grace. She wore a simple, elegant, dark dress, and her smile, when she greeted us, was genuine, if still a little shy. There was a distance, and perhaps there always would be, a recognition of the deep chasm that had once existed between us. But there was also a bridge. A narrow, carefully tended bridge of weekly phone calls, shared holiday meals, and the unspoken acknowledgement of how far they had all come. Later in the evening, after the speeches and the ribbon cutting, I found her standing alone by the etched wall, her fingers lightly tracing the words from my book. "It's a beautiful building, Genevieve," she said without turning around. "Leo has an incredible gift." "Yes, he does," I replied, standing beside her. "I spend my days now," she said, her voice soft with reflection, "trying to help people get past their own invisible walls. Illiteracy, lack of confidence, years of being told they can't. It's the hardest work I've ever done." She finally looked at me, a wry, sad smile on her lips. "You were right. It's easier to build walls than bridges." "But you're building them, Charlotte," I said gently. "Every single day." It was, perhaps, the most honest and meaningful exchange we had ever had. It was an acknowledgement of her journey, a recognition of her effort. It was a moment of quiet peace. My gaze drifted across the bustling atrium. I saw Robert and his partner laughing with Alistair Finch. I saw Leo showing his girlfriend the intricacies of the support beams he'd designed. I saw a group of my Phoenix scholars, Maya among them, now a resident physician, chatting animatedly in a corner. I saw a family, my family, whole and healed, not because the scars had vanished, but because they had learned to live with them, to see them as reminders of the strength it took to mend. The Ainsworth Center was more than just a building, it was a repository of stories. It was a testament that a legacy is not an inheritance of wealth, but an investment in people. It was proof that a foundation, once shattered, could be rebuilt with the hard, beautiful, and necessary work of forgiveness. I had once dreamed of a quiet life, but the life I had now, surrounded by the vibrant echoes of second chances, was so much richer. The door to my cottage and to my heart was open, and it was filled with light. The year after the groundbreaking was one of slow, careful stitching. A family is not a bone that can be set and forgotten. It is a living tissue that, once torn, must be tended with patience as it painstakingly reknits itself. The first real test of this delicate new tissue came, as it so often does, with the forced intimacy of a major holiday: Thanksgiving. In the past, it had been Charlotte's magnum opus, a catered affair at her palatial home, with floral arrangements flown in and guests chosen for their social currency. It was less a family gathering and more a state dinner. This year, the gathering was at my cottage. The guest list was 5: myself, Robert, Leo, and, for the first time in years as a true invitee, Charlotte. Robert was also bringing his new partner, Eleanor, the kind art historian, a gentle sign that our family was now expanding along new, healthier lines. I woke that morning with a sense of quiet trepidation. The aroma of roasting turkey and sage stuffing filled my small home, a familiar comfort that couldn't quite mask the underlying tension. Robert and Eleanor arrived first, their arms full of pies, their presence easy and warm. Leo came next, bringing a gust of cold autumn air and his infectious enthusiasm about the progress on the center. Our small talk was a dance around the elephant in the room, Charlotte's impending arrival. When her car pulled into the driveway, we all fell silent for a moment. Leo went to the door. She stood on the threshold, holding a casserole dish with oven-mitted hands. She was wearing a simple cashmere sweater and trousers. The old armor was gone. In its place was a vulnerability that was both jarring and deeply human. "I brought sweet potato casserole," she said to Leo, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's my mother's recipe. I'm not sure if it's any good." The first hour was excruciating. The conversation was stilted, a collection of polite, neutral topics: the weather, the traffic, the changing color of the leaves. Charlotte sat stiffly on the edge of a chintz armchair, clutching a glass of water, observing the easy rapport between Robert and Eleanor with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Not jealousy, perhaps, but a poignant understanding of what she had lost. She complimented my home, the very cottage she had once disdained, with a sincerity that was almost painful to witness. The turning point came, as it often does, with a small disaster. I had entrusted the dinner rolls to Robert. Distracted by a lively debate with Eleanor about the Hudson River School painters, he forgot them in the oven. A plume of black smoke announced their demise. In the old days, this would have been a catastrophe for Charlotte. A crack in the veneer of perfection that would have resulted in quiet, seething blame. Robert, mortified, pulled the charred hockey pucks from the oven. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry." Charlotte stood up, walked over, and peered at the blackened rolls. And then, she did something extraordinary. She laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a quiet, breathy chuckle of genuine amusement. "Well," she said, picking one up and examining it, "my mother always said you can't trust a man with the bread." The joke, so simple and self-deprecating, broke the spell. Leo started to laugh, then Robert, then Eleanor. I found myself smiling. For a moment, the five of us were just people in a kitchen, laughing at a batch of burned rolls. The past, with all its weight and complexity, receded. "It's all right," I said, taking the tray from Robert. "It means more room for pie." Dinner was a revelation. With the pressure of perfection lifted, a real conversation began to flow. Charlotte asked Eleanor thoughtful questions about her work. Robert spoke about a difficult but rewarding restoration project. Leo shared a funny story about a construction mishap at the center. We were not performing for each other. We were simply talking. Later, as Leo and Eleanor were loading the dishwasher, I found Charlotte standing on the porch, looking out at the dark silhouette of my garden. "That was," she started, searching for the word. "Nice. It was a nice day." "Yes, it was," I agreed, coming to stand beside her. She was quiet for a moment, hugging her arms against the evening chill. "For 30 years I hosted Thanksgivings," she said softly. "Every year I would spend weeks planning, stressing over every detail. And at the end of every one of those days, I felt empty, exhausted and empty." She turned to me, her face illuminated by the warm light spilling from the kitchen window. "Today, with burned rolls and mismatched plates, this is the first time I've ever actually felt thankful on Thanksgiving." Her confession was a gift. It was an acknowledgement that the wealth she had chased was counterfeit, and the simple, messy, authentic connection she was now tentatively touching was the real treasure. I didn't say anything. I simply reached out and gently squeezed her arm. It was a small gesture, a fleeting touch in the cold November air, but it was a bridge. Fragile and new, but real. As I watched her walk to her car a few minutes later, I knew that the work of mending was far from over, but the ground beneath our feet felt a little more solid. The foundation, slowly and against all odds, was holding. 2 more years passed, each one adding another layer of strength and scar tissue to our family's foundation. The Ainsworth Center became a beloved fixture on campus, and my life settled into a rhythm of joyful purpose. And then, a new milestone appeared on the horizon, one that echoed the very event that had fractured our world, offering a chance to rewrite the past with a better future. Leo announced his engagement to Amelia, the brilliant and kind landscape architect. When they told me their plans for the wedding, I had to sit down. They didn't want a church or a country club or a lavish hotel. They wanted to be married in the bridge atrium of the Ainsworth Center. "It's the only place that makes sense, Grandma," Leo said, his arm wrapped tightly around Amelia. "It's our family's heart. It's the story of us. We want to say our vows standing on the foundation you built." And so it was that on a perfect Saturday in June, I found myself standing not in the shadows but in the full, glorious light of the atrium, waiting for my grandson's wedding to begin. The space was filled with flowers, Amelia's touch that seemed to grow organically from the living wall. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, dappling the floor where friends and family gathered. I watched them all arrive. Robert and Eleanor, holding hands, found seats in the front row. My grandniece Clara, now a formidable young lawyer, waved at me from across the aisle. My Phoenix scholars were there, a vibrant, eclectic group that was as much my family as anyone. Then I saw Charlotte. She walked in alone, poised and serene in a dress the color of a pale dawn. There was no trace of the brittle, anxious woman from years ago. She moved with a quiet confidence that came not from a sense of superiority, but from a sense of self. I saw her stop to speak with one of the ushers, a young Phoenix scholar. She listened to him with genuine interest, a warm, authentic smile on her face. Later, just before the ceremony began, I saw her slip into the small room where Amelia was waiting. Through the open door, I witnessed a moment that would have been unimaginable just a few years prior. Amelia was struggling with a stubborn clasp on a pearl bracelet, a family heirloom. Charlotte, seeing her frustration, stepped forward. "May I?" she asked softly. Her fingers, once used to gripping with control, were now gentle and steady. She fastened the clasp with ease. "My mother wore pearls on her wedding day, too," Charlotte said, her voice soft. "She always said they represent wisdom learned through experience." She met Amelia's eyes in the mirror. "You look breathtaking, my dear. Leo is a very, very lucky man." She squeezed Amelia's shoulder, a simple gesture of motherly affection, and then quietly exited the room, leaving the bride to her final moments of peace. She sought no credit. She demanded no attention. It was an act of pure, selfless support. "Achalagal," Leo asked me to officiate. He said he wanted the person who represented the core of our family's values to be the one to join them. And so I stood before them, my grandson and his beautiful bride, my heart so full it felt like a star. I spoke of love not as a perfect state of being, but as an act of continuous creation, a garden to be tended, a bridge to be built and maintained, a foundation to be fortified with honesty and grace. At the reception that followed, Robert gave a moving toast to his son. Then, Leo stood up, glass in hand. Hers. "I have one more person to thank," he said, his eyes finding mine. "Everything beautiful in my life, including this building and the woman I just married, exists because of the courage of my grandmother. She taught me that what you build is less important than how you build it. And she taught me that it's never too late to tear down a wall and build a bridge instead." He then looked across the room, his gaze softening as it landed on his mother. "And I want to thank my mom," he said, his voice thick with a new, gentle respect, "for having the courage to walk across that bridge. I love you, Mom." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. She simply raised her glass to him, her face a portrait of profound, humbling gratitude. As the sun set and the stars appeared through the great glass ceiling, a band began to play. Leo took Amelia in his arms for their first dance. Soon, Robert and Eleanor joined them. I sat at my table, watching the people I loved spin and laugh in the light. Charlotte was standing near the etched glass wall, talking with Maya, the young doctor. She was listening, truly listening, a gentle smile on her face. Robert left the dance floor and came to my table, holding out his hand. "May I have this dance, Mom?" I took his hand, and he led me onto the floor. As my son held me in his arms, swaying gently to the music, I looked around the atrium. I saw my grandson dancing with his wife. I saw my ex-daughter-in-law connecting with a young scholar. I saw the names on the wall, and the words that had defined my life's work. Biza, Amama Kaiken. This was the final chapter. Not an ending, but a continuation. A legacy not of buildings or money, but of a family that had journeyed through the fire and learned to dance in the light, on a foundation made of the hardest, most beautiful, and most precious material of all: forgiveness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.